Good afternoon. I hope you've all got your earpiece. Okay. Monsieur le Premier ministre, Excellence.
Prime Minister,
Dans mon pauvre
Excellency,
français,
in French,
Cambodge, il y a
of a
40
poor
ans,
quality, I
je vais
spent some
expliquer
time
quelques
in
mots en
Cambodia
français, puis je vais
about
continuer
40
en
years
anglais.
ago, so I'll say a few words in French, but then I will carry
C'est
on
un grand honneur pour
in
notre
English.
école de
It
recevoir
is a great
pour la
honor
première fois
for
le
our
Premier
school
ministre de
to
la
receive
France.
for the first time the Prime Minister
La
of
France est un
France.
grand pays,
France is a great
très
country.
admiré du monde entier.
France is admired throughout
Nous
the world,
espérons
and
que vous
we
partagerez
hope
avec nous
that you will share
les secrets du
with
succès-
us the
les secrets
secrets
du succès
of
de la France.
France's
Et
success.
j'espère, le Premier ministre, je n'ai pas
And
assassiné la
Prime
langue
Minister,
française.
I hope I didn't insult the beauty of your beautiful French language.
Maintenant, je vais continuer en la langue anglaise.
And I will now carry on in English, unfortunately.
Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, it is a great honor to welcome His Excellency Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. As many of you might know, those of you who've been to the school before, I have a habit of making 3 points when speaking. In the first, I'll briefly touch on what France and Singapore share in common. In the second, I'll discuss the topic of today's lecture, the relationship between Europe and Asia. And in the third, I will introduce our distinguished speaker. One key point that France and Singapore share in common is a deep commitment to good governance. Both the French and Singaporean civil services embrace meritocracy, exemplified by France's many state education institutions for civil servants, such as ENA and l'École Normale Supérieure. Similarly, Singapore also attracts the best and the brightest to serve in government. By contrast, since I have to contrast with something, the then US President Ronald Reagan famously said, "Government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem." I don't think France and Singapore believe this. So I hope that the Prime Minister's visit to the Lee Kuan Yew School today can open a new chapter of cooperation between France and Singapore in the field of developing good governance around the world. Secondly, I would like to discuss the Asia-Europe relationship. In 1994, the then Singaporean Prime Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, proposed the establishment of an Asia-Europe meeting to foster dialogue and cooperation between the two continents. We traveled all over Europe to promote this idea. Indeed, I did so personally, as I was then the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we found that the most enthusiastic response came from the then French Prime Minister, Edouard Balladur. And indeed, the ASEAN project then became a France-Singapore project. The first ASEAN meeting was held in 1996 in Bangkok, and the headquarters of the Asia-Europe Foundation is actually located in Singapore. It is therefore very appropriate that the Prime Minister is here today, less than a week after the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the European Union. Now, let me confess that I have been very critical of the Nobel Committee in the past, but this time I think they got it right. Because here in ASEAN, we have 0 wars, but in Europe, you have 0 prospect of war. That's something that ASEAN can only dream about. And this is an extraordinary accomplishment, and therefore, this is why I believe the Nobel Peace Prize is richly deserved by the European Union, and I hope that someday ASEAN too will win a Nobel Peace Prize following the footsteps of the European Union, and I'm glad that the Prime Minister spoke about ASEAN today in his Straits Times column also. Finally, let me introduce our honorable guest, Jean-Marc Ayrault, who was appointed Prime Minister of France in May 2012 after the electoral victory of the Socialist Party led by President François Hollande. The Prime Minister also concurrently serves as President of the Urban Community of Nantes Metropole, a position he has held since 2008. The Prime Minister joined the Socialist Party in 1972. Just 5 years later, he became mayor of Saint-Herblain, becoming the youngest mayor of more than 30,000 people in the history of France at the age of 27. In 1976, he was elected to the National Assembly to represent the Loire-Atlantique Department. In 1989, he successfully challenged the incumbent mayor of Nantes and was subsequently re-elected twice, and he was behind the city's remarkable turnaround from urban decay to the city that Time magazine called the most livable city in all of Europe in 2004. The Prime Minister's national profile grew with his local success, becoming President of the Socialist Party in the National Assembly in 1997, a position he has held until his appointment to the post of Prime Minister in May 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to call on the Prime Minister to deliver his remarks, after which we will have a dialogue session over here. Prime Minister, please.
Mr. Professor Kishan Mapulbini, it's a great honor to address you this afternoon. To lecturers and students of this prestigious school, policy school. But I would love us to continue in English, but my English is not so good as your French. Yes? And I have a duty. As Prime Minister of France, I have the duty to speak French when I represent my country. After the summit of the French, so the 200 people in the world speak French. And last week, the French President, François Hollande, has been in Africa for the summit of the French countries, language countries. And I have the duty to speak French here in Singapore. Sorry to speak now in French. Ladies and gentlemen. Monsieur le Doyen, Mesdames
Dean, Ministers, Ambassadors, French parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, I am indeed delighted to speak to you today in this forum. A forum where ideas are shared, where convictions too are forged, and where points of view are compared. And this is precisely the privilege of such a university as yours. And I am aware of the high standing of your school, which bears a prestigious name, that of the founder of your state, Lee Kuan Yew. And it is right so, because this personality had a vision for his country, and he also had determination in order to reach his objective, to make change possible and to make his country a great country. And this is precisely what happened in Singapore, and this you did together. So I would like to salute your history. The size of a country doesn't make it a great country. A country is great because it is able to surmount challenges, to face challenges, to build a project, to have a significant role in history, and that is precisely what you managed to do here in Singapore. And I'm particularly delighted to be received by you at the Lee Kuan Yew School. And I wanted to share with you my analysis of the world as I see it today. I wanted to dedicate this first official visit outside France or outside Europe in my capacity as Prime Minister. If I wanted to dedicate this first visit to Asia, it is because I wanted to start in Singapore, for I am fully aware of the key role that your country plays in the integration of Southeast Asia. I am also fully aware of its actions to promote regional stability, which you mentioned, and I am aware of its standing in the concert of nations. In a few hours, I will have the honor of signing a statement with your Prime Minister to elevate our country's relationship to that of a strategic partnership. I am convinced that the partnership that France and Singapore have decided to enter into is the most appropriate response to the changes and new challenges that we must now manage. For the world we live in today is characterized by its instability, stemming from the passing of an old order without the emergence of a new order at this stage of our history. As our President of the Republic, Mr. François Hollande, stressed at the annual Conference of French Ambassadors, new powers are finding their voices. But these new powers are reluctant to assume all of the responsibilities associated with the status that they are demanding. The former blocs have disappeared, but new groupings have yet to take shape. Threats are building up, accumulating sometimes, flouting the borders that globalization has helped to erase. I am, of course, thinking about terrorism, about all types of illegal trafficking, including human trafficking, about major pandemics, and also the misuse of the new information technology. Instability has now become economic and financial, and the crisis has made the poorest more fragile and has gradually spread to all countries, including those that may feel invulnerable. On top of this, there is uncertainty about the environment, since the international community's action to fight climate change has ground to a halt, despite its crucial importance for future generations. You may object, ladies and gentlemen, lecturers, students, that this is a very gloomy outlook, and an outlook that is specific to an old country that has been disoriented by a shift in powers at global level. But I, for one, think that it is precisely the opposite, that without a clear-sighted grasp of the situation, all of us will be unable to come up with the right solutions, the right remedies. Clear-sightedness is not a stumbling block. It is a spur to action. I, at least, believe so. The need to act has never been greater. Every one of the challenges that I have mentioned calls for enhanced international coordination to implement solutions that will require each of us to make a contribution. This is the spirit in which it was decided back in 2008 to make the G20 the main body of global economic governance. As the sense of urgency fades, we cannot but acknowledge the momentum, a momentum which is not as strong as it was at the beginning. When the crisis started, everyone wanted to react. Now, people are resting on their laurels, whereas time has come to act collectively.
Au mépris des fondamentaux, une idée fausse s'est largement répandue.
A false idea is now gaining widespread currency, one that completely ignores economic fundamentals. It contends that the economic and financial crisis has become primarily Europe's problem. Yes, the persistence of major imbalances is a cause for concern for all economies in the long term. Government debt is not an exclusively European phenomenon. The surpluses of some countries cannot be sustained by the deficits of other countries in the long term. Undervalued currencies cannot provide an artificial competitive edge indefinitely. It is up to every government to live up to their responsibilities and to do their share. The ambitious commitments made in Cannes and in Los Cabos must be fulfilled. Very often resolutions are adopted, and then at the next summit people feel that it was all hot air and that only lip service was paid to these issues. Unfortunately, these things happen. This is what people and the man in the street sees and feel that politicians are powerless, and this is a real challenge for us politicians. And it is precisely in this spirit that our President of the Republic, François Hollande, who was elected on the 6th of May, set out an agenda for growth and jobs at planetary level. And France, I am convinced of this, in spite of difficulties, in spite of hesitations, in spite of delays, will be up to the task. And you said it rightly, Dean. There is no choice for Europe. It has a political but also moral responsibility. You mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize, which the European Union received. Some are ironic, well, or cynical, and most cynics you will find in France. Very often, we just constantly say mea culpa, before seeing that we do have talents, that we do have skills and energy. And I said that to business leaders. Ambassador, you organized this meeting, and I was delighted to meet them. And all those French expatriates were saying, well, don't be so pessimistic. We are conquerors. We are here in a country where we are welcome, where we can work. But what we witness on a day-to-day basis is Europe's and France's prestige, but we need decisions. So the distance, certainly this distance that I traveled a few thousand kilometers confirms this idea that we have no choice. And some people are cynic about this Peace Nobel Prize granted to the EU. But those who are cynical should feel that this distinction is also a way of acknowledging what was done by our continent, something that had never been done after 2 world wars, 2 incredible tragedies that almost destroyed Europe. And only Europe was able to do this. Those countries who had fought wars against one another were able to build a political and an economic structure together. And very often, including in Asia, people look at the European experience, not that they want to cut and paste, but they want to get inspired by what we did in Europe in order to reproduce this model in their own respective regions. So France should be proud of the fact that it was able to overcome those tragedies and those both world wars, but more specifically the Second World War, which was a real trauma for most peoples. And this Peace Nobel Prize should spur us to look at the future. Since we were able to do this, and we have been able to do this for the past 60 years, well, this should give us the energy and the impetus to face the new challenges that we will be facing in the future. So I believe that European leaders will make the right decisions in the future. France and its European partners are indeed determined to maintain the integrity of the Eurozone and to restore growth. I would like to bring you a message of confidence in the future, therefore. In recent months, the countries of the Economic and Monetary Union, countries of the European Union, have worked to remedy the shortcomings that the crisis revealed by seeking to strike a balance between different principles, starting with the principle of responsibility, which states that it is up to the member states who share ownership of the euro to live up to their commitments and to reduce public deficits as part of a strengthening of joint discipline, a decision that they made together. Also, they need to abide by a principle of solidarity, which led to the implementation of an effective crisis management mechanism, or several mechanisms that can be used to help those countries that need help and to prevent contagion. It is called the European Stability Mechanism, which came into force only recently on the 8th of October. And then there is a third principle that is essential, and that is the coordination and convergence of our economic policies and enhanced governance of the Eurozone. Some may think it is insufficient, but fiscal discipline is needed to cope with spiraling government debt. But deficit cutting without support for growth leads inevitably to recession. And that is why, in keeping with the commitments that he made to the French citizens during the election campaign, the President of the Republic, François Hollande, obtained a reorientation of European construction to promote growth. Heads of states and governments of the EU adopted at the end of June a plan for 120 billion euros, the equivalent of 1 year budget for the EU, for capital investment in Europe. The banking union is also moving forward, not with a few difficulties indeed, and that is inevitable, but the whole system will be supervised by the European Central Bank, and the ECB was able to build on this new political drive by deciding completely independently to make unlimited purchases of government bonds on secondary markets. So things have changed. Things are moving forward, and that is what I'm saying to you here in Singapore, and I am talking to all Asian countries when I talk to you. We are determined to provide lasting solutions for the problems in the Eurozone and to make market misgivings a thing of the past. This will require ruling out once and for all the possible exit of Greece from the Eurozone or of other countries. Some hesitated. For several months, some wondered what did the ones want, what did others want. But Mrs. Merkel was brave enough to go to Athens, and that, in my mind, is a sign which bears witness to the fact that Germany no longer hesitates, even though it has in the past. What is at stake is the stability of our economies, not just European economies, but also global economies, which are interlinked, and it is up to us to be aware of this. This will require further steps to deepen the economic and monetary union, which is what the French president calls mutually supportive integration. We will need common fiscal and common financial instruments, which will have to be implemented without ruling out the possibility of pooling debt. As you can see, Europe is moving again. We have integrated. Nations are not going to disappear, but what we need to do is to coordinate and to integrate further, and that is the inevitable consequence of the creation of this common currency. As you can see, Europe has started moving again, as I was saying earlier, and France has played a great part in this. And France has undertaken, at national level, efforts to strengthen its economy. For France will not be able to bring its full influence to bear on European and global affairs if it doesn't cut its fiscal deficit in keeping with its own commitments. My government has introduced structural reforms. This is not a top-down approach. What we decided was to go for mobilization of all players in French society in the process. Efforts will have to be made in the future. But what is at stake is the future of the French nation, and it is in the interest of the French nation to mobilize in order for those projects to be implemented in the long term. The objective is not to destroy what is common to us, which I call the French model, which needs to be reformed. But what is really at stake here is how to make this model one that is valid for the 21st century, the French social model for the 21st century, bearing in mind that those values that we have in common, that the French have in common, that gives them energy and impetus, that gives them the will to move forward together, is essential too. Choices will have to be made in terms of improving the competitivity of French businesses. In a few days, a great French industrialist, who not only a few weeks ago was still at the head of a great European group, EADS, which is represented here in Singapore, Louis Gallois, will submit a report on France's competitiveness to me. And his recommendations will provide a basis for the decisions that my government will be making very shortly, and then we will move on to structural reforms. In Singapore, you are all very much aware of the importance of an economic policy focused on the competitiveness of its businesses. You have been able to measure the positive impact of an effective competitiveness policy, and my government is resolutely leading France in this direction. With this in mind, I have set the goal of balancing trade by the end of the mandate we were given by the French people, which is the 5-year mandate for the President and the Parliament, excluding energy, of course. But I think that this is a challenge we will be able to meet, because we cannot have a deficit of our foreign trade. Anyway, we don't have this problem with Singapore, since we have a positive balance for France with Singapore. So this is a good example. What can be done with Singapore, this win-win situation in terms of trade, well, is also something that can be achieved with the rest of the world. So if I'm here, it is to talk to you, admittedly, but also to talk to the French who doubt themselves.
Dean, I know that you are one of those who feel that the 21st century will belong to Asia. You even wrote a book about it. The signs of this are already apparent. With its demographics, with its economic strategy, which combines debt reduction and growth, your continent now holds an eminent place in the concert of nations, especially in global governance bodies. France, which has long called for the emergence of a multipolar world, can only welcome this development. France is not scared of it. France even contributed to it by involving Singapore in the work of the G20 when it held the presidency. France knows that it can only influence the future of our planet by strengthening its ties with Asia. France is part of the Asian-Pacific space. Nouvelle-Calédonie, Wallis and Futuna are all French territories, and they have very strong links with their regional environment. An important proportion of the French population, over 7%, are resident there. Its network of diplomatic and consular posts cover every single Asian country without exception, and France is a long-standing member of regional cooperation, political cooperation bodies. It takes action to meet the challenges that we must confront together, such as the fight against piracy at sea. It is therefore no accident that France has worked ceaselessly to strengthen the ties between Asia and Europe. We have just celebrated the 15th anniversary of ASEAN, which is the result of a joint initiative of Singapore and France. This forum for dialogue has made a major contribution to improving mutual understanding and increasing exchanges of all kinds, including human and cultural exchanges. The French president will attend its upcoming summit meeting in Vientiane in a few days. The commitment of Singapore and France also enabled the Asian Europe Foundation, ASEF, to expand its activities right here. In Asia, ASEAN is a leading partner. Your region was able to learn the lessons from the Asian crisis at the end of the 1990s and maintain a sustained growth. Asia opted to open itself up to the world, and the effects of this choice can be measured in very concrete terms. For instance, ASEAN is the second largest market for French exports in Asia, right behind China. Your region has also undertaken the task of building a common community by 2015, which will emerge as a global hub of prosperity and stability on the whole planet. Even though we must be wary of any hasty comparisons, you can understand that France, as a founding member of the European Union, is very interested in your plans. Singapore is at the heart of ASEAN. We have forged a relationship with Singapore imbued with great trust. This relationship is based on an extensive and productive political dialogue encompassing culture, defense, research and academic exchanges. In economic terms, 50% of France's exports towards Asian countries go to Singapore, as does half of our investment. If we calculate in terms of euros of exports per capita, France exports 100 times more to Singapore than to China. Your country is a regional hub with unmatched infrastructure and a transparent and fair business environment. This has attracted more than 600 French businesses who decided to be present in Singapore. Finally, Singapore and France see eye to eye on many major issues, and they share the same determination to change the way world affairs are managed. Against the backdrop of extreme competition, ASEAN and the European Union, Singapore and France understand that it's becoming increasingly difficult to consider their futures separately. Our two countries are aware that collective action is the only way forward. I am perfectly aware that we are not able in Europe to overcome its divisions, the divisions when it comes to the disaster in Syria, but I think that this could be a worthy ambition for the partnership that the EU and ASEAN have developed over time, and in all events, for the friendship between our two countries. To achieve this ambition, I would like to conclude my remarks with a review of some action principles that are inherent in collective undertakings. First of all, we need to accept that what is important for ourselves may also be important for others. In a world guided by interests, it is only natural that two partners make equal efforts in order to ensure respect for what they think is essential. It is up to each other to help identify the right compromises. But then it is critical to practice the same discipline that we wish our partners to practice. This is how the EU was built, seeking a balance between rights and responsibilities. And this is the only way to avoid the devastating effects of unilateralism. Finally, we must be able to overcome traditional divisions, like those left over from the Cold War, or the division between North and South. These divisions may become obstacles to change, and they might be contrary to the objective of effective multilateralism, the one we defend everywhere in the world. These divisions can be overcome, and they must be, in order for our countries to meet the challenges facing all of us. I think that these principles are critical for building a more harmonious world that can meet the rightful aspiration of all peoples to freedom, to human rights, to stability and to prosperity. The European Union is saying exactly that. It is written in its charter. It is written in the commitments of every single nation who is a member of the European Union. And we also wish reciprocity to inspire our relationships with other countries. How can we resist the temptation of protectionism, which would only aggravate the crisis if we neglect our efforts to strengthen the fairness of our trade? Under the circumstances, Singapore, the European Union and France can once again show the way forward. I welcome the imminent prospect of wrapping up negotiations on a bilateral free trade agreement between Singapore and the European Union. Dean, ladies and gentlemen, the links that have been forged between our economies as well as globalization make it pointless to reason in terms of a circumscribed geographical area. In the long term, the success of some countries is bound to be undermined by the failure of others. It is therefore up to us to work tirelessly towards convergence of our interests and the emergence of, as it were, a global general interest. Singapore and France, which have built up a very strong partnership despite their differences, are sure to be trailblazers in this undertaking. It is at least my conviction. I am convinced of this as a politician, especially if we want the citizens of our nations to have faith into the future. The world to come is not declining, it's not a world of violence, injustice, exploitation. If we, men and women, are up to the responsibilities that have been given to us, I think that the people will be able to commit for a new step of human history. Multilateralism, state fight against global warming, human rights, fighting against all sorts of exploitations, fighting against misery. This is our commitment, and it is a great challenge for every single one of us today within governments, but it is also a great responsibility for all of you, students, because after your studies you will have a great role to play in societies as citizen, as politician, as social servant. I think that life is worth living, but I also believe that the world coming is worth living, and we need to give ourselves the means in order to have a fair right, a fair future, and I think every single one of us wants this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for that excellent address. I have the privilege of asking the first question, and then we'll throw the floor open for the audience here. You know, I'm glad you mentioned, Mr. Prime Minister, that Greece will not leave the Eurozone. But as you know, Singapore is a prisoner of the Anglo-Saxon media. And the Anglo-Saxon media tells us that mathematically it may not be possible for Greece to stay in the Eurozone because of the tremendous amount of debts it has, and you have difficulty, you know, paying these debts and so on and so forth. So how do you liberate the minds of Singaporeans from the Anglo-Saxon media on Greece?
Ça, c'est l'humour singapourien.
Singaporean humor. But you're absolutely right, Dean. I don't read British press on a daily basis, I must confess, but I do know what is written in British newspapers every now and then. Some people just don't like the euro. That is true. They even fought against it. The minute it was created, they disliked it. In some countries in the Eurozone, who still think it's a mistake, people are fighting against it. And some people think that the best way to move forward is to look inwards. And then some countries decided not to join the Eurozone because they felt that they were doing better by not being members of the Eurozone. But the creation of the euro, this common currency, is an extremely important and significant step in history. Let's not forget why this decision was made and how. Remember, it wasn't an easy decision to make. Back then, the bipolar world, bipolar Europe, had disappeared. The Soviet Union had disappeared. The wall, Berlin Wall, had collapsed. Then Germany unified. So there was a legitimate historical concern with regards to the future. What is going to happen in the future, people wondered. But then we were pleased to see that the dictatorship, which had led to the failure of a great nation, Russia, and of its satellite countries, countries that were part of Europe, which had been separated after the Second World War from the rest of Europe. Well, these countries were going to be together again. So what was the best thing to do? That is the question political leaders asked themselves back then. I'd like to mention two of them. They are no longer in office. President François Mitterrand, the late François Mitterrand, and Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who, and I understand it, decided to go for German unification, and that was perfectly fair and legitimate. And then there was a different vision, that of the French president. He had various political commitments. As a young man, he had experienced the First World War, 1914 to 1918. As a young man, and then as an adult, he took part in a resistance movement in the Second World War, and then moved into the political field. He was fundamentally pro-European. He really wanted to make sure that never again would there be a war in Europe. And he was also an enthusiast defender of European construction. And those two major historic personalities looked at the situation, analyzed it, and then decided to go for decided to consolidate Europe, to strengthen Europe. This major historical step shouldn't lead to a deletion or a weakening of Europe. And this is precisely what led to the adoption of the Maastricht Treaty in '92. Then there was a referendum in France. The issue was pretty tight, only 51%, but this was the best opportunity to go for more European integration and to go for the creation of a common currency. And you see, when you inherit from this major historic achievement, well, you have a responsibility. You have to save what was created. Of course, there are hesitations. Of course, there are difficulties, and I am very much aware of difficulties in Greece and in Germany. Public opinion is divided, but leaders of the CSU, the Conservative Party in Germany, but also the Social Democrats, my allies in Germany, share my convictions. We cannot accept to destroy what was created. Let's not give up what has been created. Let's just make it better. But this is not just about Europe, Dean. This is about the rest of the world, other countries throughout the world. How many times have I heard? So what are you doing in Europe? We need you. We're waiting for you. And that is precisely European leaders' commitment and what French and German leaders' commitments is, in spite of hesitations. But I am confident for the future. So I hope that there will be now positive articles in the British press. Please reassure me. Thanks to you. Thanks to you, Dean.
Believe me, I actually believe that, I hope that the euro will hold together. It'd be a disaster for the world for it to fall apart. Just a quick, short follow-up question. If I read correctly, I understand that you speak German fluently and you understand Germany very well. And as you know, again, the Anglo-Saxon media says that France and Germany are no longer as close as they used to be in the new presidency. So how do you respond to that?
Well,
Do you mean ever since François Hollande has become president of the French Republic?
Non, non, il ne bat pas de l'aile.
No, it's going pretty well. It's not. But you know, if you want two parts of a couple to work, one mustn't dominate the other. It's a couple. It's like a couple, like a man and wife. It's just the same as with my wife. You know, with my wife, we discuss and then we agree. And with Mrs. Merkel, well, it's the same thing. You have to agree, Mr. Hollande and Mrs. Merkel. But joking aside, the relationship between France and Germany is an essential part of European construction, but it can't be an exclusive relationship. Of course, people have to be aware of this, because it may be tempting to focus strictly on Germany and France, but other countries wouldn't be best pleased. You could perfectly envisage a situation where Germany and France agree and come to the summit and then say, well, everything is agreed now, all you need to do is sign. Well, we must avoid this. Let's not go there. But there is a conviction, a shared conviction between François Hollande, President of the French Republic, and Mrs. Merkel, the German Chancellor. The European history, this recovery of European history is based on this relationship between France and Germany. Every French president, every German chancellor, when they went and had a look elsewhere, well, every single time they came back to that all-important relationship between France and Germany, and it was always because the Germans and the French found the best agreement, the best way to strike a balance, that things were able to move forward. But of course, things aren't always straightforward. However, we are convinced that if this relationship between France and Germany weakens, then this will be a source of weakness for the entire continent, Europe. Now, let's not be controversial. The election is behind us, and I'm certainly not campaigning here in Singapore. But you know, during the campaign, there was a feeling that this relationship was imbalanced. So, yes, issues were discussed. When François Hollande went to Berlin on the 15th of May, that was the very day he was appointed as president, and he said to Angela Merkel, the Chancellor, well, there is a fiscal pact, but what we would like is to negotiate a commitment for growth that could be added to this fiscal pact, a commitment for public intervention in order to avoid the destabilization of the euro. Of course, it wasn't easy to reach an agreement. This was on the 15th of May, but then on the 28th and 29th of June, the European Council made that all-important political decision. And without this exchange, deep exchange, sincere and open and transparent exchange between Germany and France, it wouldn't have worked. So rest assured, Dean, everything's going very well between France and Germany. And I think you received Mr. Schäuble only a few days ago in Singapore, the Minister of Mr. Schäuble, Minister of Finance. Yes.
Yeah, and exactly 24 hours ago, we had Mr. Tony Blair sitting in your chair. Yes. And we were having, and we got the Anglo-Saxon view yesterday.
Ouais, Monsieur Tony Blair, il est à la retraite.
Yeah, but Mr. Tony Blair is a retired politician.
That's true. But he, you know,
but il est très intéressant.
By the way, he was asked a question: do you rule out going back to politics? He said, no, I don't rule out going back to politics. Okay, Frau, please. Over here. Can you just go to the microphone, if you don't mind, so that the translators can hear you too?
My name's Himaya Qasim. I'm a journalist at the Straits Times newspaper. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Ayrault, France has introduced a 75% tax rate on those earning more than €1 million. How do you think that will affect the competitiveness of France? Thank you.
Rassurez-vous.
Rest assured, I came here with business leaders. I am sure that none of them is concerned by this tax. It might be 1,000, 1,500 people touched by this exceptional tax. It is what I would like to say a symbolic contribution to the effort led by France in order to strengthen France's economy. And I do not think that we can ask efforts to all French people if we do not ask more efforts to those who earn more than the others. I think it is a question of fairness. France and the French people are very attached to equality, fairness, justice, to this idea. This is part of the French identity wherever you are in the world. I was discussing earlier on with French people and they talked to me about fairness, about justice. So I think this contribution is an effort, a patriotical effort, asked to about 1,000, 1,500 people on the whole of French population, that is to say 65 million people. So it's a very small example, just a small symbol. I met people who said they didn't accept this, but others said, yes, I agree with it because I want to serve my country, I want to contribute to the effort. So we do not try to get people to leave France through this tax. What we want is to support France, and France wants to support all the businesses that invest, that bring innovation, that are committed in order to transfer technologies, all businesses who also want to work towards exportation. So our tax system and the reforms we are getting ready at the moment, well, I spoke about competitiveness earlier on, and I think the message is very clear and transparent. Of course, some people used this idea in order to let to other people know, don't invest in France. But rest assured, the last figures show that France is still a very attractive country when it comes to foreign investments, and foreign investments are more than welcomed in France. And I believe that all the people who come to invest in France, to live or to work in France, are well aware that we have many assets, a good quality of life, public services, school, health. So we have many assets, and I think as a whole, France can be very proud, even though we do need to put reforms into place. But we have an excellent social security system, and this is part of the great assets of France, and we do not want to destruct this quality. So I promise I will be asking an easier question. My name is Elias.
Can you please introduce yourself to the Prime Minister? Yeah.
Voilà, je m'appelle Elias, je suis Canadien, Tunisien.
So my name is Elias, I am Canadian and Tunisian. I am a second-year student in Master of Public Policy. So for all my colleagues, I would like to thank you, Mr. Ayrault, because we have many ideas and we hear many ideas about Asia, but we kind of miss people with a great experience of Europe on the other side of the world. So we have a lot about Asia all the time, so having some ideas from Europe and America is a great thing. I have a very simple question. I'm Canadian and Tunisian, as I was saying. My first question is on Tunisia, the second one on Quebec. Mr. Prime Minister, are you worried with the new faces appearing in Tunisia? Second question, will you maintain the neither if Quebec decides to divide? Well, I met Madame Marois from Quebec a few days ago, and you know that we have a very good relationship with Quebec. There is a lot of history, culture that we share. It's a French-speaking country, but like the French president said, neither indifference nor ingerence. I think it is up to the Canadians to decide for their own future, but we need to maintain special relationships, part of an agreement we have with Quebec. Myself, I will be visiting a conference in Quebec next year that takes place either in Quebec or in France every year. And after visiting Montreal and Quebec, I'm sure I will also go to Ottawa because I have a great respect for Canada, which is a great country. Second question, or rather your first question, Tunisia. Well, I think we need to be clear-sighted on what is happening in this region. We always need to understand the starting point, which is the revolt against the dictatorship, because the Tunisian people couldn't bear this dictatorship anymore. You will remember what happened, and the repression, the violent repression. Back then, I was still in the opposition, and as from the beginning, as the head of the opposition in the French Assemblée Nationale, I said that what was happening in Tunisia was legitimate. And in some way it was a revolution. This does not mean that a revolution works straight away and can immediately create the basis for democracy. There is a long way towards democracy, and today the democracy in Tunisia is not solid enough yet. We have conservative forces that do not really like democracy, pluralism, freedom of expression, of conscience, and they kind of fight in order to install a theocratic system. But there are other forces as well who get their inspiration from other revolutions, and they want Tunisia to find its place within the concert of nations with a consolidated political system where every single person has its place with the right to believe or not believe, with a real political pluralism. I want for the Tunisian people to find the answer to this question. Right now, many debates are taking place, confrontations, controversy as well. The elections will take place very soon. The Tunisian president came to visit into France. I met him and we spoke about all the points that I just mentioned. But if I think back about France's history, which is a revolutionary history, 1789, do you think that democracy came straight away? No, it was a very long way. Sometimes we stepped back, but then step by step we were able to look forward and not inwards, not to regress anymore, but we have to be patient. But what we also have to do is to fight forward, and I think the aspiration of the Tunisian people, may they have all their religious beliefs, I think their main aspiration is freedom, and I want them to succeed. Democracies, and I am thinking about France, but also the other European democracies and the other people, what we want is to help them in order for their revolution to be successful. President Obama mentioned a very beautiful sentence, and he said, we were also born from a revolution, but it wasn't easy. So the democracy, constructing a democracy is a fight, an everyday fight, and we need to keep going forward.
Over there, please. Gentleman over there. Yeah.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. Je m'appelle
Mr. Prime Minister, my name is Rachid. I am French, European, but also Singaporean, as adopted Singaporean. I am glad to see our flags next to each other. I would like to talk about multiculturalism. What is your opinion when it comes to multiculturalism? Today, we are talking about Singapore, about France. Do you think that lessons are to be made? Do you think that France can learn from Singapore, because our two countries have things in common? We have multicultural societies, all religions, all skin colors as well, but our societies are also very different in terms of politics. I have been living here for 5 years now, and I see that the policies in Singapore work. So do you think that France can learn something from Singapore? Amnesty International also criticized French government, not yours, but the government which was left to you. So what do you think about the image of certain communities in France? And you are here today in Singapore, and do you believe that France can take some lessons from the Singapore example, especially when it comes to communities?
Well, there's a tricky question. It's a very difficult question to answer, and it's always difficult to compare two histories that are profoundly different. What is specific to the French model is that France is a republic made up of citizens that are equal in law. But they are not always equal in fact. There are social inequalities, obviously, but also sometimes people have a feeling that they are being discriminated against. It's not always a feeling on the basis of their religion, or where they live, the color of the skin, and this is a source of frustration for individuals, a legitimate frustration. However, I do not believe that the best way to solve this issue and to meet this legitimate concern is to create a nation that would recognize the various communities by identifying people with their country of origin or their community or the community they belong. In France, we integrate. We went for integration. Integration doesn't mean ignoring culture or religion, but we do not judge people on the basis of their culture or on the basis of their religion. And this, indeed, is a system that is grinding to a halt to a certain extent, because as centuries went by, we integrated further and further. A survey was made only recently, a few days ago. This may restore trust in our society. It was a sort of opinion poll where several young French citizens were asked, but young French citizens whose parents weren't French, but who have French nationality. And they were asked, do you feel French? And 90% of them said, yes, I do feel French. But then if you asked another question, such as, do you feel that you are perceived as a Frenchman by other French people? And they said, well, that's it was more mitigated. The answer was more wasn't as clear-cut. So yes, we need to look at a new way of living together, but living together while being at peace, without fear. And we do have a problem in France. The economic crisis, unemployment, difficulties in countries such as Tunisia. Well, yes, Tunisia too, but actually I mean mostly the MENA region. There are tensions that have an impact on the situation in our country, and the one thing that we fear in France, it is the rejection of others. And the only way not to reject others is to come back to equality, integration, social promotion, social mobility. These are all essential elements of the French culture, and that is the best way to bring about more serenity in the way we live together. And it is up to us, politicians, to make sure that no one is stigmatized. We need to make sure that our Republican service, which is an asset, which is a strength, but which is grinding to a halt to a certain extent, well, this engine needs to be started up again, and this is a major challenge for France.
We only have 15 minutes, so can you please be quick, short, sharp? Introduce yourself to the Prime Minister.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Monsieur Prime Minister, je m'appelle Eduna.
Thank you. Prime Minister, my name is Iduna. I come from Indonesia, and I have two questions. My first question, President Sarkozy banned the niqab in public spaces in France, and about 3,000 women wear the niqab, but this led to stigmatization in the Muslim community in France. What is your position and the position of your government? Are we breaking away from values, or is this continuity? Second question, I read in the press that a headscarf such as the one I'm wearing could be in the long term banned in France. And a third question, I am not a French citizen, I am Indonesian. And as you know, Indonesia is a tiny little country at the far away in Asia. But I speak French, I learned your language, I made the efforts. But you know, last time I was in France, it was in 2006. I really didn't feel welcome at all in France. And that is why I'm asking these questions. Me, or my friends who are wearing a headscarf, and this is our choice, will we one day be able to go back to France and to feel welcome as we do in Singapore here or in England? Well, if you come to France, you are welcome, and I hope you will feel welcome. I will certainly welcome you, but it isn't always easy to explain. outside France. I mentioned the French Revolution. I mentioned our political history. And it just so happens that what makes France specific and different from other countries is secularity. We call it laïcité. It's always difficult to say laicity, call it secularism in English. But what it basically means is that the state has to be 100% neutral with regard to religion. And we have provisions in law and in the Constitution stating that the state and any church, any organized church, Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, Muslim, need to be 100% separated from the state. But also the state, the republic and the state, guarantees that you are entitled to live by your faith. There is no recognition of official religion. Public services are perfectly neutral in France. Freedom of conscience is guaranteed, but also freedom of religion is guaranteed. No one can be stigmatized because he wants to live by his faith or her faith. But there is another side to these constitutional and legal principles, which is the following. In state schools, no religious sign is authorized within state schools, within the walls of state schools. And in public spaces, you can be dressed the way you are dressed, if you so wish. That isn't a problem. But a law was passed fairly recently, and that law provides for the banning in public spaces. I mean, again, you can do whatever you want on the street and be dressed the way you want. A Catholic priest wearing his habit can do so if he so wishes. But there is one exception. It is the niqab. Niqab, namely the outfit where you cannot see the face of a woman. I mean, you can do that in your private home, but you can't do it in public spaces. And now I forget the questions you asked. This was it, wasn't it?
Saying that would she be welcome back in France, and you said yes, she'd be welcome back in France. And for you, I think this is a very delicate.
Non, mais franchement, moi
No, I'm being very frank here. I'm explaining French law, French values. But France is... freedom is very dear to the French heart. The freedom to believe or not to believe, to respect other people's convictions is essential for our... It's in our DNA, almost, which is freedom, equality and fraternity. This is the French DNA, and this ties back with the sir's question. I'm not saying that it never happens, that sometimes you see people who don't respect other people, but the French people has shown throughout history, throughout our history, we have shown that we are a tolerant people, and that's the only thing I want to remember. I am not saying that we didn't experience unpleasant situations, but this is not what the vast majority of French people feel like. We were able to resist dictatorship and anything that is an obstacle to freedom, and therefore, again, you're welcome to come to France. Please do come to France.
Professor, I forgot to mention, I'm a student here, so...
She's also a student here.
Bonjour, monsieur. Je m'appelle Yvonne.
Good afternoon. My name is Yvonne. Everyone speaks French here. Actually, I studied in France for 5 years at Sciences Po. I am a Singaporean by origin, and now I do my PhD here at the Ligue School. I asked the same question to Tony Blair. I would like to ask you what your vision is for Europe in 20 years' time. Can Europe really have a common and consistent economic and foreign policy? Or, if nations cannot disappear, As you said, what can be done? And my second question is, what is your plan B, or what is your exit strategy in order to reduce public deficits in France? Well, it would take about an hour to answer these questions, but I've been told I was a bit too long in the answers I gave to the questions. But about the future of Europe, I said I don't believe that nations will disappear or should disappear. Jacques Delors, who was president of the European Commission, said that he called for a federation of nation-states. I wouldn't go as far as to say a confederation, the United States of Europe, as on the basis of the United States of America's model, to have 27, 28 countries that would join together to create a single nation. Well, I think that is just utopia, and it is even dangerous. However, further integration, economic integration, political integration are required, I feel, and countries in the Eurozone should be more aware and more assertive when they talk about their community of fate. You know, when we talk about the EU, 27 countries right now, well, the EU is the #1 economic and political structure in the world, and Europeans aren't aware of this. And that's unfortunate, because it's an enormous capacity. But I am aware of the fact that politically, the European Union, in spite of its great power, is fairly weak, politically speaking, even though in commercial negotiations at WTO level, for instance, the EU negotiates. It's not every country separately that negotiates. The EU, as such, negotiates. But every country wants to remain autonomous. For instance, France wants its own foreign policy because it is specific to France. But there are things that we can do together. One example. One conflict we can't, that is a disaster for all people, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, with a goal, namely to create a state, a viable state for Palestinian people. This is a legitimate goal, and it's been going on for years and years and years, and it's a very, very dangerous and explosive situation. Well, in that particular case, I think that France, which is Palestine's or the Palestinian authorities or Palestinian territories, and Israel's first and economic partner, doesn't play its economic role, political role, because we could say, well, there's our demands. I mean, we demand that you start up the peace process again. But the EU is hesitating. Well, if Tony Blair were here, he probably would say that he agrees with me, because I believe that he is one of those men and women who work on this issue of Palestine and Israel. I think he agrees with me on this. So I think that Europe really can do something, can achieve something, but provided it has the will to do so, political will. And one more thing. If you think that the 21st century will be Asia's century, well, I don't disagree. There will be new balances, there will be power shifts, but Europe will still play a very important part. First, commercial and economic power, also living standards that are very high. In terms of culture, Europe is doing very well in terms of welfare, in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, schools, environment, the intellectual world, universities, the academic world, where we are trailblazers, and we need to be aware of this role that we can play, the energy transition, the fight against global warming. These are all challenges that we face together, but that we can really raise up to. And I think that if France and other political organizations, and the EU and other political entities, such as the ones that exist and are emerging in Asia, will be able to work together in this multipolar world. But in this multipolar world, Europe has to play its part, and that is my struggle, and that is exactly exactly the message I wanted to leave with you, because I think that it's very exciting to see what we can do in the future. What is less exciting is that some of our fellow European citizens are faced with youth unemployment, and we need to invest in this, because if, in spite of our economic strength and financial strength, we can't give hope to our young citizens, well, then this European dream will not become reality, because the young Europeans will give up on Europe. And I don't want them to give up on Europe. I want them to be major players in this 21st century that we need to build together, Europeans and everyone else in the world.
Mr. Prime Minister, I know you have, with apologies to all the questioners, the Prime Minister has got a very important program after this, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that he has been asked very difficult questions, from secularity to 75% tax to the Greek exit, and I must say you responded very well to the questions, and I'm really grateful to you for sharing your vision of Europe at the end. And believe me, I'm a strong believer in Europe, although I also believe in the Asian century. So I'm going to share with the Prime Minister a copy in French of the Asian century.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Oui, c'est très bien.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.